Full transparency, I didn't think I was going to do 2 big videos based on Sonic games back to back. I really didn't. I had a whole other thing planned and that damn hedgehog just clawed his way back into my life. Frontiers has been hitting those neurons in my brain in both the right and wrong ways. Inside of me there are 2 hedgehogs and both of them are currently fighting over control of every brain cell in my skull. Please help, they won't let me sleep and they keep blasting screamo music into my ears and telling me to collect memory tokens. It's only been a few months, but it's already been a big time for Sonic. Frontiers comes out and makes a huge splash for a lot of people, finally giving fans the slightest shot in the arm. Donkey put out a video and everyone reacted completely fine to it. Yuji Naka, the co-creator of Sonic the Hedgehog himself, gets arrested for 3 different counts of insider trading. And then Sonic was publicly executed at the Game Awards by Paimon, so, you know, standard fare there. I haven't seen a Sonic game this polarizing in a long while, maybe not since the original release of Sonic Colors or even Unleashed. On one hand, you've got a lot of the hardcore fans giving the game a lot of glowing, raving reviews, and I can wholly understand why. It's been 5 years since the last new Sonic game that gave the tiniest squirt of dopamine, but that post-Mania clarity was also soured by forces, so the ruined hoggasm still lingers in a lot of people's minds. There's a reason you're seeing so many memes about a functional Sonic game is basically a 10 out of 10 to hardcore fans. And while the joke is funny, for a lot of people seeing something that's just a functional hog in a field is a beacon from God. And I admit when I got into the full open zone and just started running around, time began to melt away. Believe me when I say that no one has more love lost for forces than I do. I wasn't even going to get the game when it initially came out, I had considered letting it fully pass me by. But my mother ended up surprising me with it for Christmas that year and asking if I still liked Sonic. And you know what? While I didn't fully love the experience, it was still silly, stupid fun making a character and seeing what I could do with them. Spoiler, it wasn't a whole lot, but at least I got a sick gun out of it. I beat it all in a day and then, like a splash of cold water to the face, the game crashed at the very end and apparently never autosaved once. So I lost all, 5 hours it took to beat forces with all S rank? Needless to say, I have never felt more soft from any Sonic experience in my whole entire life. I think that's where a lot of the less prominent but no less loud negative responses to the games have come from. This isn't me saying, oh, if you hate Sonic, nothing will ever convince you to like it, but rather, if you're predisposed to hating something, it'll probably be hard to change your mind. I won't deny that I still felt that jaded, cynical glare for forces in the back of my mind every time I started to see something new show for Frontiers. But if you're keeping your opinion stuck in the Forces hate wheel, or even further back to something like Sonic Boom or God Help You 06, then I don't think you'll want to see the game's good side. While I was excited at the pure prospect of a new Sonic game, I wasn't sure how I should feel about it. My initial reaction to the game's reveal was less than excited. The endless Sega hired the man jokes on Twitter and images of Sonic and Unreal Engine 4 landscapes. To say expectations were already tempered is a bit of an understatement. Then IGN did the game journalist's greatest trick and played a video game badly, and man, I was about ready to write off the entire game and wait for someone else to do a review or a stream of it. But then Sega and Sonic Team went into overdrive with their marketing. New, better footage of the gameplay, releases of various songs from the games, vandalized whips so fucking hard you don't even know. And I admit that it was hard for me to stay out of the hype cycle. You are not immune to hedgehog propaganda, never forget that. I'll get this out of the way now. I'm going to do my absolute best to not view Frontiers against previous games. While I did that a bit in my last video with Sonic Adventure, that was looking at an older title with the perspective of older, more hog-jaded eyes. And hey, check that out right here if you want, wink wink plug plug. And while it might be difficult to do with this game, I think it's unfair to a product that's trying to have its own identities to have the sins of its past weighing it down. There will be some aspects of the game that are impossible to ignore without past context, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. I think too many reviews and retrospectives of these games come with the caveats of, well, at least it's not 06, or at least it's not Boom or Forces. And while I appreciate we all know what a dumpster set ablaze looks like, sometimes you have to look away from the smoldering heaps for a little while. It can't be boogeymen forever. It's been almost 20 years since Sonic 06. While I may joke about the games, I genuinely do get tired of people using it as smokescreen for criticisms, or worse, using them constantly as qualifying statements. Frontier feels like a genuinely heartfelt first step towards something greater, towards a framework that the games can iterate upon. I say that with full confidence, without any need to put it up against the worst of the worst. There's enough goodwill both in the game itself and the development team behind it that it would feel disingenuous to even put Frontiers near the same category as some of these previous titles. Sonic Team as a group doesn't need me or anyone else to defend them, and that's not what this is going to be. I have plenty of criticisms lined up for Frontiers as well. Sonic won't get out of this squeaky clean. I've got a lot of feelings about the game, and I've done my full time with the full depths of these new Frontiers. This is the first Sonic game in a while that I have 100% fully finished, and because of that, I need to flush out the brain rot in my head since the credits started to roll. For those worried about spoilers or anything like that, I'm going to split this up into 2 different sections. First section is going to be a general discussion about the game itself. You'll likely only see footage from like the first island and maybe a bit of the second. If you've gotten to at least Ares Island, you'll be totally fine. Thankfully, the game doesn't have 6 total playable characters to dissect like adventures, so the first section will cover most of the game. The combat, the movement, things like the cyberspace stages, all this stuff like that. They've changed a fair bit about the moment-to-moment activities, and some for the better and some not so much, and there's a lot to say about all of it. The second section, though, will be all hands on deck. I'll go through some of the story beats and even the boss encounters, but I'll make sure to quarantine it properly behind the hedgehog containment cell. Initially, I didn't even want to talk about the story much at all because I didn't want to accidentally spoil someone. But the further I got, especially I got closer to the end, the more I realized I had so much to say. Much like the changes to the general gameplay, the story developments are just as important. To avoid it would be avoiding half of the appeal, at least the appeal for people like me who like seeing funny animal characters have personal trauma and revelations about their lives. Frontiers has already left a big impression on me. I've thought about pretty much everything I want to say since it came out and since I finished the game. But now it's time to really see what's going on in these new Frontiers and see what the future might hold for my favorite little vermin. In a lot of ways, it's both ironic and fortuitous that I did a deep dive into Sonic Adventure right before Frontiers came out. My mind was firmly placed right into Sonic analysis mode, and I was ready to pick apart anything that I could find. Would it be good to simply run around in the open world? Would there be enough things to do and see to keep me engaged? Would it feel like trying to drive a semi-truck through tar whenever you wanted to turn? Well, I think that Sonic's speed and movement placed in an open world environment is a perfect combination. You don't want a character to feel constrained by a level or a zone and punish the player for using the character's moveset. There's a reason that a lot of Sonic fan games over the years have placed him into large, open environments with open-ended level design. If you give the players the tools and the playground to run around in, they'll find both the optimal and insane ways to get things done. I think of Sonic Robo Blast 2 for these sorts of things. Watching speedruns of this game feel like it was a proper Sega-made sequel right after the original trilogy. Perhaps a bit more recently, I think of the Spider-Man games that Sony made. I know plenty of people who just boot the game up so they can swing around in the environment. When you make a movement fun, that can be a massive draw to your game. At the same time, you don't really want to accidentally lean into that Sega hire this man territory either. Simply plopping a character into a giant, flat landscape and having them run around isn't all that interesting. You have to give players landmarks and challenges naturally baked into the map itself. Hills and valleys are fine for a little bit, especially again for a character like Sonic who can run around like a coke-addled cheetah, but there should be consciously created, engaging challenges that allow Sonic to show off those skills in fun and unique ways. And make sure you pay attention to those words, unique and natural. It's a secret that'll help us out later. I think Frontiers pulls off its open zone in a genuinely fun and engaging way. Open zone is a very deliberate phrase, by the way. It's not a fully open world, which I think is what a lot of people were expecting, but it's the better option here. I can see the appeal and the benefits of having Frontiers in a fully interconnected map. Aside from some of the technical aspects that might come with that, poppin', it could have made the adventure feel a lot more grand. The creative officer for Sonic Team, Takashi Iizuka, gave a lot of insight into their plan when creating this open zone design. He explained that this game began with us asking how to give more freedom to linear Sonic games. Its origin is in a different place from open world action-adventure games. This new open zone game system is our way of giving as much freedom as possible to a Sonic 3D action game. Hell, he even calls out that the world design in Frontiers was partly inspired and intended to be an evolution of the adventure fields from Sonic Adventure. This man is a man after my own heart. Holy shit, what do you mean he wants to continue the Sonic Adventure series? Sega, don't you dare try to pivot away from this and make a Sonic Forces 2 at this point. I am begging you. Each island is its own self-contained zone, part overworld and part action stage. In each of those zones, they've sprinkled the island with lots of little challenges, collectibles, enemies, just a bunch of different objectives that you can work towards if you want to. Do you want to run around and find the memory fragments for a few hours? Do you want to just go find big bosses and fuck them up? You can just do that. You can completely ignore the main objective if you want and get lost in the zone. You see that mountain over there? You can kind of sort of go there, nah, not really. I totally just didn't run away from the endgame trigger that told me that I had now access to the full open zone for the first time because I was already running around in the open zone. Nope. Definitely didn't spend about 2 hours running around Kronos Island before I had actually progressed the plot and finally saved Amy. Amy, I'm so sorry. Please don't. Please, not the hammer. Please, it's not time for the flattening yet. Please. But I think that's something that adds to both the charm and the appeal of Frontiers as a whole. While the game does give you clear objectives to progress the story, there never feels like there's any sort of rush or obligation to do so. You can easily go an hour or two before you even see the first major plot point of rescuing Amy on Kronos Island. You can accidentally just run ahead and ignore the prompt to save her and get into a fight with a massive boss out of nowhere. Each zone is filled to the brim with nooks and crannies to find, various puzzles of middling difficulty that can give you just the slightest feeling of dopamine when you complete them. That little jingle when you finish a puzzle or have a part of the map open up kept me wanting to run around and find the next one, to get a better lay of the land and find my own objectives to follow. You can get into this sort of flow state, running around and finding one platforming challenge leading to the next, chaining the collection of these memory tokens all throughout the islands. I've seen various reviews comparing the jumping from one challenge to another so seamlessly to older Tony Hawk games, and I can definitely feel that. They gave Sonic the framework of being a pseudo open world collectathon, and I think that works perfectly for his design. There was some hesitation when I first found Kronos Island all it had to offer when the initial railroading and information dumping had ended, but that began to fade away quickly as I ran off to the nearest shiny I could find. Each path you take leading you to new mysteries, new challenges, and discoveries. Puzzles that can only be solved later, or a conspicuous speed pad on the ground just begging you to trust its trajectory. There's just something so satisfying about purposely using Sonic's physics and speed to break and cheese all these platforming challenges. Like, it's clearly not the intended way they wanted you to get the token, but who cares? You've given me the tools to rocket a hedgehog into the air like a bullet, and I'm gonna take full advantage of it. I'm basically just one backwards long jump from being able to destroy this game's pacing and skipped right to the first boss. Well, they found that already? Oh, well, damn, alright, speedruns of this game are gonna be fucking sick, I can't wait. What do you mean Sega themselves are putting out videos encouraging and showing off some of the speedrun tech? Well, you know, good for them, honestly, for embracing that community. I wish more games would. Let's get down to brass tacks, though. There's a lot of game to cover in this hog bonanza. I'll try to get through it as quickly and concisely as I can so we're not all bored. To start, I want to play a little game of something old and something new. Sonic's bag of tricks has been expanded in interesting ways this time around, some familiar little hedgehog antics and some new ones for even the most closeted anime fanboys out there. I say staring directly into my own eyes in the mirror. From his old kit, Sonic picks up a lot of abilities from all over his time adventuring. From the adventure games, his homing attack returns once again as its tried and true staple of the 3D Sonic games. Honestly, I can't think of a game where Sonic has had a Z-axis and he hasn't been able to catapult himself as a cannonball towards his enemies. Frustratingly though, it's once again tied to the lock-on feature instead of feeling more natural like the older 3D games. It's not so annoying that it's impossible to work with, but waiting for something to lock on just to plummet to the ground can get a little... Sonic keeps the lightspeed dash from his older games as well, but A, I genuinely cannot remember if it's actually explained how you use it, and B, it's on the left fucking stick. The amount of times I just cheesed the challenges related to the dash with a boost because I didn't know it was even in the game was staggering. Like, Sonic Adventure 1 charging was really shitty, Sonic Adventure 2 having every single ability on one button was shitty, but I don't think this was the solution either, come on. His boost from the more recent entries in the series comes back too, but it's a little less unwieldy here. I said before in my previous video, boost gameplay isn't bad. I think it could be a really good time in games like Unleashed and Generations, but speed for the sake of just going fast doesn't make a good Sonic game, you know? And I still stand by that. I think Frontiers is one of the first implementations of the boost that I genuinely enjoy using. It's used more as traversal here rather than being a hog-shaped semi-truck careening down the highway with blood plastered on the grill. Getting from one side of an island to the other feels really fun. While the stamina meter definitely not ripped straight from any other sort of open world game feels limiting at times, there's usually plenty of reasons to stop and recharge it thanks to the numerous aforementioned platforming challenges around. I like to think of them as a little pit stop so Sonic can recharge his boost juice. Finally, Sonic gets his drop dash back from Sonic Mania, which I think is a nice treat to use. Just in general, drop dashing and getting good slopes or downhill momentum can take you from one side of the island to another, and man, it just feels like silly fun. Drop dash is a great ability and I'll never forgive the way that Force has butchered it. But in terms of new mechanics for Sonic, he got tired of his old moveset from Smash and decided it was time to throw hands. No more spin dashes for me, Mr. Sakurai. I've taken up the way of the fist. These are all packed into a new skill tree, which has its own setbacks, but in general, each ability on the tree gets use and adds something new to Sonic's arsenal. I wouldn't say that the combat is all that deep in Frontiers. Most of the enemies you can really get away with by just mashing your basic combo if you wanted to. But for the people that want to get flashy with it, to use big abilities and chain them together for huge damage, I'd be lying if I said it didn't feel like Devil May Cry or Bayonetta sometimes. Big fist and kick combos, huge spin cycles and the tornado reference from Heroes, give your enemies the 4 PM flattening special, create literal DBZ energy volleys. There are some wild moves that Sonic gets this time. By the time you get to the end of the game and you have your attack stat filled out, it's crazy how strong it makes you feel. Coming up against some of the bigger mini-bosses and just nuking them with your stronger strikes feels so nice after how frustrating they can be earlier on. There's also a parry as part of Sonic combat repertoire, but don't you worry. Don't you worry, we'll get to that. The last new ability worth talking about is Psyloop, the first ability on the skill tree that you'll use by nature of the story. I won't lie to you and say that it doesn't feel gimmicky and silly to use sometimes in the middle of combat, but I also won't lie to you and tell you that it doesn't lead to some of the sickest shit you can do in combat sometimes. Psyloop is an all-purpose tool that Sonic gets, essentially holding down a button and creating a circle with a cyberspace trail that follows him. Think something like the tow cables from Star Wars or like the bikes from Tron. Who the fuck is this reference for? I'm not even old enough to reference either of these. I'm not the target audience, what the fuck? You make a big circle by running and something generally happens. If you're not sure what you should be doing in a puzzle or in a fight, the best option is generally to loop it and see what happens. Did you know that if you did a little infinite on the ground with the Psyloop and connect it, that you spawn infinite as your best friend? That your boost meter will be infinite for a little while? Yeah, I didn't know that either until I watched a stream of someone playing it, and now you know, blessed by the great forbidden hog facts. I think this kit is one of Sonic's most robust and fun to use in a long time. It's a great mix between general normal speed platforming skills he's had for a long time, while incorporating some of the lesser known ones into the fold. Attacks and combat prowess based around speed and overwhelming his opponent feels so natural. There's nothing that's too out of the ordinary in his normal fighting skills. He's quick and he hits hard. I mean, it's not like Sonic is suddenly grabbing a sword and slicing enemies 5 times his size like in Revengeance. In short, this is the most capable Sonic has ever felt in any of his games. It feels like they took a lot of what people liked of the character from outside sources, like the movie and the comics, and decided, man, maybe we should actually make our hero have some heroic strength. And like I said, I don't want to compare too much to other games, especially not some of the notoriously bad ones, but I mean, Forces opens up with Sonic getting his shit kicked in, and then this one has him go up against Evangelion-looking robots one-on-one. I'm just saying. I think that giving the open zones a more collection-heavy focus with bite-sized platforming challenges was a really smart idea. Even if I wish the challenges were implemented a bit more naturally into the landscape, there's still a rush of being rocketed out of one of these challenges and quickly scoping out your next target on the way down. Most of the objectives you'll be hunting down in each of the islands come in a few different varieties. The first of which is the collectibles, things like the memory tokens, the gears, the knot Koroks, things of that nature. Each one of these items has their own specific gameplay use and are all important in their own ways. Sonic teams spread these little goodies all over the island, so no matter which direction you'll head in, you'll have something to chase after. Memory tokens are the most plentiful collectible, the ones that you'll find sprinkled all over the map. You know those images you'll see in like other games, like Breath of the Wild's Korok locations or the coins in the new Pokemon game? While it's not fully to that level of collection hell, there is a daunting feeling when you unlock the full map and see all of these memory tokens around. Like, they're all just there, taunting, begging you to go through the little Halo Forge obstacle courses the Ancients have set up for you. These are needed to progress through major story moments, as well as unlock some of the optional stories for other characters. I was just collecting them by nature of playing the game, so there was never really a point where I feel like I needed to go out of my way to collect them because I had too few on hand. You need to get a good amount of these to get through the story, but you definitely do not need to collect every single one of them on the map. Let me clarify. There is no reason to collect every token on the map other than clearing it. This is not a spoiler, this is a warning. Do not be like me. Do not clean the map of every single token because you are obsessed with collecting everything in the game. There is no reward, there is no reason. Learn from my mistakes. Next up are the ancient cogs and the emerald vault keys. Cogs come from smashing up the giant ancient guardians around the islands and are necessary to unlock the various cyberspace stages. In turn, doing cyberspace stages unlocks the vault keys depending on how many of the missions you do within it. Unless you never want to do any of these objectives or stages at all, you'll likely never be hurting to continue progress. I've been trying to structure these in order of importance, so I guess next we'll talk about the red seeds of power and the blue seeds of defense. These are pretty straightforward. Sonic can find these little bad dragon products sprinkled throughout the entire world. They can drop from enemies at random, and they can be found within crates and machineries left behind, but the place you'll find them the most is doing the various island mysteries. Their names are pretty self-explanatory too. These seeds will increase Sonic's combat power and his defense respectively when built to one of the Elder Cocos. Lastly, the Cocos themselves. These little friend-shaped nuts are impossible to see most of the time in the open zone unless you're slowing down to do a puzzle or something. Their color scheme makes it impossible to see them on the similarly colored natural landscape. Especially if they're on like the ruins or out in the open or something, you kind of have to listen for their little clicking noises while they toddle around. Like the seeds, you take these to another version of the Elder I'm gonna put this in, oh my god. I spelled Coco wrong in the script and I spelled it Elder Cock. Like the seeds, you can take these to another version of the Elder Coco, which, can I just say, have immaculate facial hair? I don't really like the face on the rounder one, but the tall boy, yeah, that mustache is absolutely pristine. Either way, our rotund friend here will help you upgrade your run speed or your maximum ring capacity for a set amount of Coco that you collect. Neither of these are particularly important. I barely upgraded ring capacity until like the third or final island. I'd argue that upgrading your defense is more important in the long run in terms of keeping your rings on hand rather than just hoarding them. Altogether, these items create a collectathon loop that Sonic goes through in a natural progression. There's no feeling of needing to do a certain content to unlock others while you naturally explore and engage with the terrain. You'll pick up memory tokens by nature of finding the various challenges, you'll find seeds by nature of beating enemies or doing island mysteries, you'll find cogs and vault keys by simply completing the mini-bosses and cyberspace stages. It leads to this lax atmosphere that, despite how fast Sonic as a character is, there's no rush to this adventure. Take it at your own pace, discover as much as you'd like to discover. The Starfall Islands are your playground. I know there was a lot of information dumped between both Sonic's abilities and the various collectibles, and I promise we'll get to an actual discussion of how the game works. The problem with talking about Frontiers is that, with as much as it keeps to a familiar territory, it changes up just as much, if not way more. Because of that, it's hard to just go, this part of the game is good, or this part of the game is bad. Each system interacts with one another, and it's impossible to glance over one while talking about the other. It would be impossible to talk about the impact that the seeds have without describing how combat works. It's hard to talk about how good Sonic controls without dissecting both the open zone and cyberspace levels. So all that setup was intentional and not simply for the sake of padding out the video. I promise I'm not that scummy yet. But hey, if you want to smash that subscribe button and dingle the bingle. All of this is just amounting to the fact that everything in Sonic Frontiers builds up upon itself. No matter what you do or wherever you choose to go in the open zone, you'll find something that allows you to continue doing something else. I never felt like the pace, or well, lack thereof, was interrupted or ruined. If you were to regularly engage with the content in the open zone, you'll have plenty of collectibles to truck through the story whenever you get tired of your current location. In the grander scheme of things, most of these collectibles are tied to very specific gameplay tasks. Frontiers always has that chili dog dangling from the stick right in front of your face with something interesting to go after around the corner. By now, even in just the first few moments of the open zone, you'll find the most prominent gameplay sections that litter the entirety of the game, random bite-sized platforming challenges that populate the vast landscapes with memory token at the very end of their little obstacle course. No, I'm not gonna lie to you and say that I think these are the most impressively executed. The platforms never really change their appearances between the different islands, so I hope you like dark gunmetal gray everywhere you go. While I got used to these platforms and their often jarring appearances, I do still think that these little segments are good and quick hits of dopamine. It's extremely easy to get stuck in this loop of finding challenge after challenge after challenge, only to look outside and see the sun has come up, realizing that you've spent your entire evening playing as a blue hedgehog and wasted hours upon hours of your mortal coil. Let's speed things up a little. Each island has a map that you can use to reference where you are and where you're trying to get to. It'll show everything from memory tokens, bosses, cyberspace stages, to even side quests and the objectives around. But in order to unlock these little chunks of the map, you'll have to find these little question marks sprinkled around and complete their task. These are called the Island Mysteries, and they're honestly incredibly easy. Most of them barely take under a minute to complete, and the map opens up a little more after each one. At first you might be a little confused as the map opens up like a weird shotgun spray of squares. It's not particularly the best at showing you too much right away, but the mysteries help lead you around and get a good lay of the land. It's another deliberate way that the game was designed in order to flow from one spot to another and keep you moving. Finish one mystery? Nice, here's a little injection of serotonin with that jingle. Now go find the next one, sport. Also, it's genius that when completing a mystery, they always make sure another one pops up just on the edge of the map you've just unlocked. It's little breadcrumbs leading you to the next mystery, enticing you to unlock the map just to distract you from trying to save your friends. They've been stuck for a while now. What's another hour in a digital hellscape? I'd say that the last big gameplay loop the game throws at you is probably the cyberspace stages. These vary wildly in quality, if I'm being completely honest with you. I can't say that I had issue with the way that Sonic controls in these stages after like the first hour of the game, but I can see how people wrestle with the way that this hog moves. Remember earlier when I went about the way that Sonic controls or turns? This is where that mostly applies. While I think the movement in the open zone feels fluid and maybe the best Sonic has controlled since the adventure games, there's something that's strangely magnetic about these cyberspace stages. When Sonic has free reign on his movement in these stages, his turning radius feels wildly reduced. While in the open zone you can turn as sharply as you wanted to, the cyberspace stages feel like they're trying to keep you moving forward at any cost. At the same time, winding paths feel really bad to deal with the turns. When the 3D stages focus on mostly going in a straight line or vertical platforming, it feels alright, hell I'd say it even feels fun. But man, Sonic just hates any sort of turning in them. I I think more people have problems with the 2D stages in this, which I feel is also weird. In general, I think the 2D stages were more fun, with some small exceptions, but ultimately they just felt uninspired. For a little bit of clarity, the cyberspace stages in the story are supposedly drawing from Sonic's memories, and while it's all well and good, it does mean that it rips level design straight from previous Sonic games, often directly. While seeing a stage you might like from previous games is funny and novel, man, it feels obnoxious after you're like 20 hours in and you get another cyberspace stage with Green Hill theming. I hope that, in a possible Frontier sequel, they get the proper time to cook up action stage segments without having to rely on nostalgia repeatedly. I'm starting to share the sentiment that I'm tired of seeing Green Hill, Chemical Plant, and Sky Sanctuary for every single game now. And that's finally the general gameplay you'll get in Frontiers. There's nothing else to describe. I can finally start to dissect how I feel about all these different aspects and what I really feel about the whole package before moving on to the story. What was that?
Over here!
No, it can't be him. The evil was defeated, he cannot be real.
Don't run away!
Big no!
Glad I found you.
That bastard. He snuck his way into Frontiers after all this time? He knew that the real gamers out there couldn't resist a chill fishing minigame with lo-fi beats in the background and silly, high-def fishing models and goofy references to the past. And he demands these purple tokens you can find everywhere. He hid them around himself. He had to. He knew we'd get here. He knew we wouldn't be able to resist fishing for him. And where the hell did he get all these items to purpose? Why does he have so many seeds? Where the fuck did he get all these Eggman lore memos, which have some crazy story implications? And he has dozens of lost Coco? Big, why do you have all these lost children? What is wrong with you? He even has his own cyberspace portal. Was Big part of the Ancients all this time? That explains his love of water and fish, despite being a cat. It's all coming together. Oh god, I have to tell everyone. I have to tell them the truth.
Come out, wherever you are.
There's a lot to do in Frontiers, and a lot of it is a good foundation for a sequel. From what Sonic Team has said, they've taken all the feedback seriously and they're going to use it to improve on a follow-up. That's an amazing thing to hear from them, provided Sega doesn't decide to pivot and let Yuji Naka direct Sonic Boom 2 from prison. But there's something nagging at me here, and something I need to bring up. While there's so many fun and fascinating aspects to be had with the game itself, I don't think that there's a single system that doesn't come with some sort of caveat. The more that I've played the game again for footage and to make my thoughts more concise, the more that I've started to realize that these caveats exist. And while I don't think that they change my overall enjoyment of the game, it's hard to ignore that they're prodding and prickling annoyances. Yeah, the open zone gameplay of running around and collecting tokens can be a good time, but there's factors that turn it into a slog. The pop-in for these platforming challenges is abysmal. It's indefensible with how low the render distance is for some of these. It doesn't make the game unplayable, but good lord does it make it frustrating and jarring just running around and having something spawn barely 10 feet in front of your face. There's this one that drove me insane on Ares Island for a good half hour because the platforms needed to find out where the tokens were so high up that they literally never rendered. It was impossible to actually figure out where I needed to start this challenge, and my first time around, I had to cheese it with a boost jump. Also, the way that the camera completely fucks up if you don't enter a 2D challenge the right way is extremely bad too, because it can make it impossible for certain obstacles to even function. Good luck if you want to get to the other side of the island but you haven't fully unlocked the map yet. Fast travel doesn't unlock until you discover every section of the map, and sometimes discovery points are locked off by story progress. You can fast travel to the Elders, but only if you've fished up their scrolls at Big's fishing minigame, which you have to find on each island. Hope you didn't get stuck somewhere really far away and obnoxious to get out of. You will, and you will hate it. And God help you if you're trying to get a memory token when a roaming mini-boss floats by. You better not be in the air at all, otherwise the cutscene of the mini-boss introduction will destroy your momentum and send you straight to the ground, ruining all of your progress. The mini-bosses themselves can have some fun aspects to them, but besides fighting them for the first time for the novelty, they become a chore every time you encounter them. And even if you've beaten them once, they force you into their big intro card with no opportunity to skip them. Some even lock you into their fight if you linger just a little too long, meaning you either die or you beat them. It's maddening. Or they can just be this big spider bastard and have a terrible camera angle that causes you to have a hard time seeing the attacks that jump from rail to rail sometimes. Good design, thank you, I love it. Cyberspace stages? Well, I already mentioned most of the problems that they have, but there's also the issue of them being really easy. The only really challenging one is the literal second stage you encounter. Everything else after that and the rest of the game is a boring breeze. Even on hard, it doesn't change the difficulties of these stages at all. Having multiple objectives per stage is nice and adds a bit of a challenge, but there's no real variations between them. Collect enough rings, get through in a certain amount of time, get all the red star rings. You can do most of these in one go without any issue. The combat and the skill tree. Combat is wildly inconsistent if it makes you want to be good at stringing together combos or just mash attacks. Some enemies are more fucking frustrating than others. These little guys, these fucking fodder on Ares Island, they have a shield that you cannot break on and stun you every time you hit them. And if you don't properly side-loop them all, you might accidentally hit one that's not stunned and ruin your attack. It's trash, and there's so many of these other little enemies that have stupid gimmicks that make them take longer than they need be. Multiple enemies take control of your camera away from you if you accidentally walk a little too close to them, or completely halt your progress and force you into a fight. Meanwhile, you get so many skill points that on my first playthrough, I had over 200 extra skill points by the time the game was over. Nothing I could spend them on. I think I had all the powers by the time I was midway done with the third island. And the parry? Man, this parry might be one of the strangest fucking parries I have ever seen. So many people I have seen play the game have had the same issue, as in trying to use it like an actual parry. You know, something you have to actually properly time to deflect the attack. No. Instead, you just hold the parry buttons and you will automatically block the attack. There's almost no risk or reward. There's mods to add that timing mechanic to make it interesting. Not that it matters as long as you just spam the kick attack. You'll be able to shred through most enemies like they're made out of paper mache even on hard mode. Oh, you want to level up your speed or your ring count with all those cocoa you collected? Well, you better not have more than 30 or so because you have to level them up one at a time. So, by the end of the game, if you're trying to max out all your stats and you collect a bunch of cocoa, usually by Big's fishing minigame, you'll be sitting there for over a half hour plus doing the same prompt over and over and over and over, upgrading your speed and your rings by 1 point every single time. That's not a joke. I was on a call with a friend while cleaning up the last of the things I needed to do in the game, and I was just sitting there throwing these little coconut children at the elder, telling him that I needed to make me faster for the last half hour, maybe more. Even Big's damn fishing minigame has a caveat. There's no randomness to this minigame. Every fishing hole has a set list of what fish you'll be able to catch in what specific order. If you remember what the first fish you caught was, you can go through the entire loop with zero consequence and get every fish in that spot without any hassle at all. The main gameplay loop has fun moments, but the smaller problems in the background compound over time. I started to notice it the most when I got to the third island. Things that hadn't necessarily bothered me too much started to irk my brain later on. Running around to get the tokens, actively ignoring any fights outside of new mini-bosses for the sake of completion. I never outright wanted to ignore any of the cyberspace levels per se, but I can't say I was ever particularly excited to get into one either. They were usually the last thing I finished on any island. Getting hard stopped from exploring parts of the island because of the story, something that really wasn't much of an issue early on, became more and more frequent. The most egregious being again on the third island where there's this massive bridge that you can run up and easily climb over, but an invisible wall blocks you. To get to the other side, you have to get to the point in the story where it wants you to go to that part of the island, and the story makes you do the exact thing you tried but made a mini-game out of it. I'm starting to realize how much I didn't like the third island for a lot of different reasons. I don't mean to make it seem like the game is lacking in merit, especially after this little rant I just went on with the various caveats. I think it's really quite the opposite, with most of this just coming to mind after I'd already played the game. While I was actively playing, most of these issues didn't crop up because I was having too much fun zipping and zooming around like a hedgehog on speed. Frontiers isn't perfect. It has issues, it has noticeable glaring issues, and you'll never catch me saying it doesn't. But looking back on these issues, it didn't stop me from finishing it, or completing it, or wanting to start it up a second time to see how much better I was. And if anything, I think that's a massive testament to the foundation here. The open zones do feel great to blast through, giving Sonic free terrain to just be as fast as he can is a whole level of enjoyment I never knew I wanted. If the actual platforming challenges felt more naturally baked into the world, I could see this game having some amazing clips on Twitter of people chaining one challenge to another, seeing something like Tony Hawk-styled combos of people showing how many challenges they can link before they hit the ground again. I don't know. There's a lot of fan games out there that have shown the potential Sonic can have in an open terrain. I think Sonic Team has that same idea in mind, but either through, I don't know, lack of funding, lack of time, something, they might have had to resort to these more Gmod parkour map designs. And while I think they service the game well enough and technically with heavy quotations, fit what the story was trying to do, I can't help but wonder how well the game would do without them. There's a strong foundation here. There's room for improvement, and based on what Sonic Team has said, they're looking through the criticisms and taking these comments seriously. And that genuinely gives me some hope for the future, to see what they might build on to make the minute-to-minute gameplay better in the sequel. For now though, this is where I tell you that the spoilers are coming in. I've spoken about as generally with the game as I feel comfortable doing, so I wanted to speak on some of the more specific elements of the story and the gameplay. For reference, I will be talking about the actual end of the game, all the bosses, and the major story beats, so if that's not something you want to see, skip to this time code for the outro of the video. For the rest of you, buckle up, because we've got a lot of ground to cover. Again. If you watched the last video I did on Sonic Adventure, you'll know that I'm something of a connoisseur of Sonic stories. I think that even the goofiest Sonic story can be fun and interesting. I may be cringe for loving Mephiles the Dark from Sonic 06, but I will die cringe saying that he has a cool story. I think that Sonic is one of those characters that has a unique position amongst other cartoony and platforming game peers. His games don't shy away from trying to make these DeviantArt OCs have a serious side, or at least give them some real stakes on their adventures. Sometimes Mario tries to have a story peek through the fun Wahoo Man's games, but they eventually get pushed to the side. A lot of people have a fondness for the Rosalina backstory and general somber tone that most of Mario Galaxy has in its whimsical adventure, but there's this aversion to making Mario a little more than an avatar for the player to see the game through. I'm certainly not saying I want the games to suddenly be atmospheric, story-driven games. I'm not looking for the Last of Us styled stories with Sonic getting his head smashed in with Amy's hammer in a visceral and community-shattering way. But I don't think that there's anything wrong with giving characters depth no matter how silly they might look. Story beats like the Elise kiss from 06 or some of the more edgy, silly lines from Shadows have permeated this idea that Sonic can be nothing but silly cringe. But then when they try to course correct a bit and treat these characters like actual characters, suddenly it's silly and stupid but on the other side. A lot of this is just a plug to go read the IDW comics and honestly some of the Archie stuff too. For all the goofs that people like to make about them, a lot of the arcs in both the past Archie comics and so much of the current story run are filled with great character moments and heart. I genuinely don't see why a character or a world like Sonic should be treated any differently than something like, I don't know, the TMNT. And I'm sure many of you out there were traumatized by the ending of the few Pokemon Mystery Dungeon games. You can make any character or story concept seem outlandish, you just take out the context and put insane clips from any series, and you'll make it seem like trash. It's all about how the content is presented to you. Star Trek is a great show with many serious and engaging character moments that I love. But I can also tell you that there's a story about a ghost that sleeps with women to suck the life out of them, explain nothing, and you'd think it was the dumbest shit you've ever heard of if you had no context. Sonic Frontiers is the first game in a long time that felt like there was a genuine respect for the characters. So many of the previous entries for years flanderized these characters to their most bare and boring essentials. Sonic was the carefree hero and wisecracking goober, always there to stop Eggman. Tails, when he was allowed to get screen time, was often relegated to being information dump and plot pusher. Knuckles, in the rare chance that he was allowed to appear in a game, became more of a slapstick meathead and for the butt of jokes. Amy, while she didn't get the best rep in most of the games anyway, was often just portrayed as girl obsessed with Sonic. And these four aren't even the worst examples. Every character in the series after a certain point were just boiled down to simple traits. While I would have loved to have seen how Shadow was handled in this story, there's still that fear of making him spout the most early 2000s Sasuke AMV quotes for like a full hour. Then you look at the roster of characters in games like Forces and you go, oh yeah, that character even exists to begin with. Like when was the last time that Espio or the Chaotix were even important? Or what the fuck is going on with Silver and Blaze's canonicity? If you're not one of the main four or Shadow, it often feels like Sega doesn't care about your existence in the slightest. Rest in peace, Marine. We barely knew ye. Rouge has been getting something of a resurgence, I've noticed, especially with her getting more front billing in something like Sonic Prime, so that's nice. Maybe they're starting to realize that people like their characters, and hey, not just for the way you're thinking, if you know what I mean. Frontiers gives motivation and characterization to almost all the main players of the story. Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles all have this shared goal of trying to escape and understand the mysteries of the Starfall Islands. But it's on each of these various islands that we see a breakdown of all these characters and their interpersonal relationships play out. And while it sounds almost pitiful to say, it's extremely refreshing to see these characters act like they're all friends again. Forces tried so very hard to give a serious story with stakes and character moments. I can acknowledge that there was a genuine attempt to make something ambitious, but damn if it didn't step forward right into a pothole and break its ankle. None of the characters in the game feel like they exist for a purpose other than awkward fan service. It felt bizarre watching Silver appear in a mainline game again for the first time in like a decade outside of a boss cameo in Generations. It was strange having all of the Chaotix around and barely doing anything. And of course, you can't forget about Knuckles talking about the literal concept of war. So many of the characters outright betray their past developments in ways that just feels hollow. Tails cowers in fear at the sight of Chaos Zero, a form that was weaker than the only version of Chaos he actually goes toe-to-toe with in Sonic Adventure. Knuckles tries to act like this tactician that's been hardened by the ongoing war, a step up from his slapstick subthermal IQ in the past, but he lacks his protective and honorable side. Seeing these characters interact with each other again in ways that makes them feel like time-tested allies is just such a breath of fresh air. Each island has Sonic saving and traveling around with one of his friends, allowing each to have time in the spotlight and be their own character again. They also have their own personal journey that they go through on these islands that reflects something that's gone awry with their characterizations over the years. Amy and Sonic exploring the first island together was wholesome and a side of their characters we don't see often. Even though there's still overtones in the story that Amy goes through there's nothing of the Sonic obsession that she's been marred with for years. She realizes her own shortcomings and desire to help others instead of simply chasing after someone. And Sonic supports that, since that weird will they, won't they, almost misery type relationship that they've had for years is gone. They're just friends here. Sonic has a genuine care to Amy's well-being, and she shows care for him as well. Though her main plot on Kronos is helping a specific Coco reunite with its lost partner, they never really smack you in the face with its relation to her and Sonic. And I think that's smart, because that's the extreme surface-level scenario going on here. In truth, much of Amy's journey here while helping this specific Coco is discovering how many of the others are in similar amounts of pain. She helps another pair move on from their turmoil with Sonic's help, as well as realize that the Cocos are stuck in some sort of strange limbo of their lives. When she finally reunites the pair of lost lovers, she and Sonic witness their last moments together in a shockingly somber and mature scene for the series. And it causes Amy to reflect on herself and see how she views the world. It makes her want to help others, to go out and improve the lives of whoever needs it, however she can. This might be one of the first times, if paired up with another girl character from the franchise, she might actually pass the Bechdel test. Good on you, Sega, for allowing the bare minimum of character progression. Oh wait, that one conversation she has with Sage is about Sonic? Oh, oops, shit. Well, you tried. Knuckles and Sonic traveling together on Ares Island felt like someone enjoys the dynamic the two have. They brought back their rivalry and their light-hearted antagonistic side to each other, making them feel like good friends again. But more than that, there's moments where they remind you that Knuckles is just a good guy all around. So much of the representation of Knuckles in the recent past have painted him as this buffoon of a meathead. Sonic Boom was arguably the worst offender of this, even outside of just giving him fingers for some reason. But even in places like Lost World or Forces, they just make him seem either incompetent or outright stupid when that was never really his character. He's always been hot-headed and impulsive, but he was never dumb, and that's something that they correct here. He's still quick to protect or fly off the handle if someone tries to harm him or Sonic. Like the really great scene here where Knuckles gets ready to defend Sonic from Sage, who I haven't even talked about yet. Jesus Christ, there's so much to this game. But he also has moments that ground him again, give him reason as to why he feels so impulsive or agitated. He's a protector, the last of his kind, sworn to protect his birthright that he doesn't even fully understand. And because of that, there's this responsibility he feels he has to understand what happened here on the Starfall Islands. And while he's on Ares Island, Knuckles tasks himself with helping a lost group of Coco soldiers find their way back to their group. He feels like it's the right thing to do to protect them and bring them home to where they belong. But thanks to his condition being stuck between the cyberspace realms, he needs Sonic help to protect them. And this sounds stupid, but Knuckles has a literal PTSD moment thinking back to when he failed in Sonic 3 and has this revelation that he's almost jealous of Sonic's freedom, only to have Sonic remind him that while he's the last of the Echidnas, he'll never be alone with his friends. And it's just a nice moment that doesn't really try to be funny. They just let these two characters be friends. I think that of everyone, Tails gets the most love and attention when it comes to his journey. While I think his story is a little shorter on the third island, what they give you to work with here is much more deliberate. Of all of them, Tails' story feels like it's a course correction on how his character has been portrayed in the past. Tails' last story moments were in Sonic Frontiers, with him being shown as this cowardly and scared child that needed Sonic's help to beat foes that he himself had beaten stronger versions of in the past. We'd already done this big storyline of Tails stepping out of Sonic's shadow before, but it feels like Sega either forgot or didn't care about the games that came before this. But through his storyline on Chaos Island, very good name Frontiers by the way, good job, we see this shift towards letting Tails be his own hero. Much like Amy and Knuckles, Tails finds a Coco that needs help with an unresolved issue from its past. This Coco was a great engineer who was tasked with helping the defenses until the great hero of their people arrived. And the more that he and Sonic assist the Coco, they find that the hero never really arrived, forcing this engineer Coco to step up and be the hero himself. Again, they don't quite hit you over the head with the relationship of this story to Tails, never quite spelling it out so directly, but it's obvious what they're showing here. Tails even directly calls out how he acted in Forces, almost acting like the writer reaching out to the player going, "We know that was shit. Don't worry, Daddy's here now." I'm never saying daddy again in a video, I'm so sorry, that was such a bad joke. Either way, Tails becomes resolute about becoming his own hero again after they escape the Starfall Islands. He wants to be someone that Sonic wouldn't even recognize when they meet up again, and it's almost bittersweet. Tails acting like he first needs Sonic's permission, but Sonic being wholly understanding. Even saying he didn't realize Tails was growing up so fast. It's such a sweet moment between these characters that we almost never see. Sonic himself is course-corrected too in some ways. That's not to say he isn't still snarky and a bit of an ass here and there, that's still in his character. No, what I mean is that they lean harder into the other aspect of Sonic, the will to help out others no matter what. They show this side so much through the entire game, showing concern and care to his friends when they need him, and even sympathy to his villains when he realizes their issues as well. Hell, when I saw Sonic downplaying how corruption was affecting him, it felt like I was seeing a long-forgotten show I had missed, a nostalgic feeling from being a kid. And the further you get into the story, the more that Sonic takes that corruption onto himself, you see the lengths that he'll go to make sure no one sees him struggle. Even when Sage asks him why he continues despite his pain, he just marches on with a smile. It's that aspect of the character that's been missed. Smiling in the face of danger or dismay isn't about being a snarky prick, but rather about showing courage in overwhelming odds. Sonic is a character that actually cares about those he helps, and even being understanding to those he's up against. I know that people like to mock the ways that certain games have been written in the past, but it's a certain aspect of Sonic that I've missed. Campy as it is, the story and writing makes it feel like a proper adventure with actual stakes. Even if the gameplay feels easy, there's an actual weight to what Sonic and his friends are going through. It's the aspects of the games like Sonic Adventure, its sequel, even games like Shadow and 06 that I love. Leaning into these characters and letting them be who they are, cringe reception be damned. Seeing Sonic and Knuckles be playfully at odds with one another made me smile. Seeing Tails pour his heart out to Sonic about being a burden tugged at my heartstrings a bit. Hell, even some of the moments with Eggman made me genuinely feel bad for him as a character for the first time in like, shit, 20 years? Since Sonic Adventure 2 maybe? I think that's the mark of the game being so well written, when Eggman is fleshed out as a character too. It's very easy to overlook villains in any sort of cartoony platforming game, as all they really need to be is evil. You don't often need motivation for a villain in media more aimed towards kids because it's not often they'll really understand it until much later. But Frontiers doesn't shy away from that, providing Eggman with an admittedly short arc that really doesn't get resolved. Eggman is the catalyst that gets this whole story rolling, unintentionally breaking and unleashing cyberspace and the issue of the Starfall Islands. But it's in that unleashing that one of the other major story characters is also introduced, Sage, an AI that Eggman has built to try and wrangle the complex power that was cyberspace on the Starfall Islands. But now, thanks to his integration with the systems there, Sage has become a fully fledged creation unto herself. At first, Eggman only sees her as a program, of course, but that swiftly changes over time the more that we interact with Sage. She's an obstacle for Sonic in trying to thwart him, but only because she's trying to protect Eggman. When we see Sage report back to Eggman, there's a bond forming between the two, not of creator and machine, but of father and daughter. He even reflects on this in some of the Egg memos, realizing he's referring to Sage by her, wondering if she has any preference on what she wants to be called, even outright calling her his daughter at one point. Based Eggman saying trans rights, you love to see it. But at the same time, over the course of the game, we see the way that Sage's emotions and heart begins to grow. Slowly, through her interactions with both Sonic and Eggman, she starts to realize the value of life, both hers and everyone else's. While her priority is keeping Eggman safe, it's never solely because it's her function or command. She starts to care about what happens to Eggman, and we see how much she almost thrives for his approval. The moment when she asks about Orbot and Cubot being her brothers makes your heart sink, because you know they're just going to make this poor girl have a sad ending. It makes me wish that she could meet other characters like Metal Sonic or Belle from the IDW comics. I know to a lot of people, the idea of Sonic the Hedgehog, this little blue mouse who loves chili dogs and going fast, having a story of any depth is silly. I acknowledge that, and I fully agree with you in a lot of ways it's really fucking stupid. But it's the perfect amount of stupid that I love, and the sincerity behind the writing is what sells it all. For the first time in years, these characters are given material that suits them and the personalities that they've been given so long ago. They're not just mouthpieces to spout silly one-liners or slapstick in between racing through levels. I think that it's the mark of masterful storytelling that these characters can be allowed to shine and given this type of treatment. If you're even the least bit curious about Sonic Frontiers' story and its characters, I highly recommend you either check out the game as a whole or just watch some cutscene compilation on YouTube. It's on the level of something that I think could have been a Sonic movie or a TV show on its own. As a small little tangent, talking again about the gameplay side of things, I want to look back at the boss fights real quick. I mentioned skipping over them in the first section of the video, and that's because I feel like they're such an experience that you just need to see them on your own first. I haven't had boss fights build up like this in a long time, or at least feel like they have, where getting to the fight alone feels like an event. Each boss is given some time to shine in the corresponding island that you fight them on. Usually this is brought about by Sage, who could briefly influence the Titans' decisions. These Titans are absolutely massive mechanical monsters, some of them looking like fucking Evangelion robots straight out of the anime. They're so foreign, they're so alien that they're just imposing in design alone. But when Sage influences them to go after Sonic, they're in a class all of their own, easily able to turn him into a blue splatter on the ground if they so wanted to. It's what makes the final confrontation with each one so impactful, working all this time on each of the islands to get the Chaos Emeralds. When you finally get the last one, usually by scaling each Titan a la Shadow of the Colossus, the boss fight feels so earned. Super Sonic in this game is on Dragon Ball levels of crazy power. While Sonic has taken on more powerful bosses in the past, like Dark Gaia or even Solaris from Sonic 06, this is the first time it's felt like Super Sonic was this powerful. The combos, the invincibility, the sheer amount of strength that they give to this Golden Hog is wild. Throwing enemies, catching massive blades like Metal Gear, it's so perfectly 2000s anime that I can't help but love it when they come around. And the music? Good fucking lord, the music. When Undefeatable first played during the Giganto boss fight, I just had to sit there for a second to process how hard it went. And judging by the sheer number of reactions online, I see so many people did as well. It's fucking insane the presentation they put into these boss fights, making them feel in a lot of ways like playable cutscenes and spectacles. There are some technical sides of the fights that have problems, namely in some of the unexplained mechanics and interactions that catch people off guard, myself included. Not to mention, even on PC, having this weird loading screen in between some of the bigger attacks that take you out of the moment when you pull them off. But at the end of the day, I'm gonna be honest, I was too busy playing out my best Tumblr fanfic fantasies slamming around these robots like I was Goku the Hedgehog. That said, the final two bosses leave a lot to be desired. Supreme, the second to last boss, is the final Titan fight, and he's honestly very easy. He's basically a second version of Giganto with some extra range capabilities, though he has some fun cutscene attacks that I do like. The final boss though, man, I have so many mixed feelings about it. See, first off, the true final boss is only accessible if you play on hard mode. If you play on easy or normal, you'll get a few quick time events that automatically beat the final enemy of the game. But even then, if you do play on hard, you get a shoot 'em up style boss reminiscent of Ikaruga or something even more recent like Nier Automata. But it's just, I won't say it's anticlimactic because it's still fun. The story being told with this boss is intriguing and it reveals a lot about the difficulty the Ancients had when facing off against it. At the same time though, it's so faceless, so generic for lack of a better word, that it doesn't feel like the real final boss. You don't even really get to play as Sonic in this fight until the quick time events show up after the shoot 'em up section. It might as well have just been a completely different game. I get that they were foreshadowing it with Sage's hacking minigame on the final island, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's good. I think a better way they could have done this final fight, if they wanted to still have it be this almost eldritch being as a boss, was give it more unique of a form. One of the more interesting aspects of this boss is that it takes the form of whoever sees it perceives true death to be. But I mean, they could have at least chosen something more interesting for the player to look at other than a small moon. But even beyond that, letting you take it on in phases, maybe as Sonic, then with Sage's help in the Supreme Mech from before, or even having Sonic's friends take up the powers of the other Titans you faced off with in the other islands. It really feels like that's what they are building up to, but that's getting into the meat of the game's story itself. That's the one last little thing I want to touch on, the overall story that's going on with the background of the Starfall Islands. I'm going to gloss over a lot of the smaller, intricate details overall, and generally give my thoughts about what the bigger story is. So again, if anything I've said has made you want to interact with this story on your own, please do so. I think the story of the Starfall Islands is fascinating in a lot of ways, but opens a lot more questions than it answers. In a super condensed understanding of the material, Frontiers is about an alien race from beyond Sonic's world that were chased off of their own home hundreds of thousands of years ago. Technologically advanced beyond our years, an entity defeated them and, in their escape, found themselves crashing into our planet. In doing so, their great power sources, the Chaos Emeralds, were also brought to the planet along with them. We learn about how the Ancients set up more defenses on the Starfall Islands, using the Emeralds as power sources for their weapons and walls to protect themselves from the End. It's even revealed that many of their most basic cannons have the same strength as the Eclipse cannon, you know, the one that shot the funny meme beam from the real-time fan dub? Yeah, that one, from Sonic Adventure 2. And we learn that many of the flashbacks that we're seeing is the results of when the End returned to our planet to face off with the Ancients one last time. only to get locked away by the Ancients' own life forces in cyberspace, leaving behind the Cocos that once resided as their pseudo-heart. It's a very conflicting feeling when they reveal this aspect, that the Emeralds were alien in nature. In some ways it makes sense, that these mysterious and all-powerful plot devices are not of this world, as their power has never truly been defined. They can do some insane things to characters and even to the planet, which raises even more questions. Why does this race look so shockingly similar to that of Chaos, the guardian of the Master Emerald? It's implied that the Master Emerald was already on our planet by the time these aliens crashed down, with the Master Emerald being the one that drew the Chaos Emeralds in. But at the same time, these Ancients predate even the Echidnas who worship and technically now protect the Master Emerald. It leads to just a lot of confusing questions now thanks to this revelation. What does this mean for the temples that exist in Sonic Unleashed? Were they also built by the Ancients to seal away Dark Gaia? What about Unleashed as a whole? Is that the planet that we're now working with that was directly referenced in this game too? While many questions are open, a lot of them aren't exactly answered in any meaningful way, and honestly, I don't think that they overall needed to be. These questions, while confusing, leave the door open for more story in the future, better chances to flesh out and bring this world together again. And I fully think that's what they're trying to do, not just because of how much legwork the story pulled in this game, but also some of the outside factors in Sega's company. Not too long ago, there was an opening for Sega that, in extremely broad terms, amounted to being a Sonic story lore keeper, helping untangle the many threads and story beats of the Sonic franchise going forward, and you bet your ass I applied for my dream job. Only to get nothing back, and I'm not bitter about that at all. Nope, not one bit. Still not bitter. But one of the more interesting things that Frontier does is recanonize a lot of old Sonic games through one cohesive storyline. What do I mean by that? Well, through a lot of character dialogue and even the egg memos, we get direct callbacks and references to the plots of older Sonic games as well. To many, this might just be seen as fan service, and in a lot of ways it is. But Sonic as a franchise has always been a lot like Mario, wherein a lot of the games don't often have connecting threads between one another. When one adventure ends, you won't see much reference to it when the next one opens back up. In Frontiers, we get confirmation that this game takes place after all of the others, that the previous events and adventures have happened. Reference to the Black Arms from Shadow the Hedgehog, reference to the Babylons from Sonic Riders, bringing up by direct name the islands from Sonic 1, 2, and 3. Fuck's sake, they even canonized the random racing planet from Team Sonic Racing. These aren't just for the sake of,
I know what that is!
but directly putting this story into reference. All of these events from previous games have happened now. Their plots and their developments are canon, even as recent as Lost World and Forces. Tails, again, directly references his fear when facing Chaos in Forces, meaning that happens in the canonicity of this story. Not only that, but they add canon that has never been considered for the games before. Characters that have only ever existed in the IDW comics, like Tangle the Lemur, are referenced directly by name. Mentions of a time traveler, more than likely Silver, are brought up when you fully power yourself up and talk to the Elder Coco again. They even name drop Styx, the character that's only ever existed in the Sonic Boom canon, as a character in the story too. It's wild how much they're pulling together into one storyline here now, and I'm here for it. In many ways, Frontiers feels like it's a soft reboot of the franchise. They're not wiping the slate clean of any previous interactions or events, but quite the opposite. They're embracing their past and using it as a new jumping off point. It's the authors in Sega looking at the past games and going, these are all part of our story and we're taking them forward. And it's something that gives me genuine hope about the franchise going forward, embracing a side of the games that the community has cared about for so long. For the first time in a while, I feel content and confident about what Sonic's stories might be like going forward. It's a feeling I haven't felt for years, maybe since Unleashed, and it's a great feeling to share with much of the overall community. But that's enough rambling about everything. Let's get to the end of our little journey, shall we? When I first booted up Frontiers on the night it launched, I remember sitting at the starting screen for a few moments. The somber piano opening of I'm Here playing over it set a tone that I wasn't expecting, one that felt familiar yet foreign. The gray skies behind the menu alongside it creating a different atmosphere to a Sonic game that I haven't felt in, well, ever. And I think that was all intentional, creating an expectation for the player before they even hit new game on the menu. Like Sega saying, this isn't going to be like the Sonic games from before, this is new territory for all of us. It was an experimental journey for everyone involved. For Sega, it was taking a risk and leaning into aspects that the fans have been asking for, and trying new systems that hadn't been tried in official capacities. For the fans, it was taking a risk with those new systems and aspects, with some mixed results on both sides. I think that Frontiers succeeds in a lot more ways than it fails, and when it does something right, it goes full force with it. The base gameplay that there is phenomenal and ripe to build upon in a sequel. The storytelling is the strongest it's been in a long time, with characters that feel like actual characters in a world that is begging to be expanded upon with more depth. While some might see our mixed reception to a game as detrimental or problematic for a game's future, I think having conflicting ideals colliding with one another is the exact response that Frontiers needed. On one hand, universal hatred of the game would have only led them to pivot course again towards something more familiar and safer. Another mania, while it wouldn't have been unwelcome, would just feel like Sega was going the new Super Mario Bros. Route with their franchise. On the other hand, universal praise makes me worry that Sega would see nothing to improve upon at all and try to force Sonic Team to pump out another Frontiers next year. That would only bring an even more rushed, buggy mess that would spell disaster for this ambitious attempt that Sega Team is making. It's clear that Frontiers is not a finished game, even more evident by the amount of DLC that's already been announced coming this year. While it's all free, so much of what's being included feels like things that should have been in the base game by default. But that only adds to my opinion that, with what is here, I'm excited to see what the future of Sonic brings. Frontiers has bugs, it has issues with its overall gameplay, compounding annoyances that build up by the time the credits roll. But none of it impedes my enjoyment of the package, nor feels like this is a game I wouldn't want to see more of. At least, I hope that's the case considering I've now finished the game twice. If I really hated this game that much, I would have probably been screaming at the top of my lungs and using rage to get clicks. The longer I played, the more I felt time slip away after every memory token that I found and every cyberspace level that I tore through. I found myself just enjoying running around the world and finding new areas that I could find collectibles in. While not every island is exactly the same in terms of fun, I never got tired of just running, exploring those new lands and seeing the sights on each one of them. Though the pop-in in some places was aggravating, I never felt like it fully impeded or I was upset with the game. Save for that one spot I mentioned in Ares. Fuck that place. While the combat wasn't always the best, the highest highs of fighting big enemies vastly outclassed the lowest annoyances I found in fighting. I remember the fun I had taking down some of the bigger bosses on each of the islands for the first time more than I remember trying to avoid them the next time they appeared. Hell, for even some of the more annoying aspects the bosses had, like squids stopping all of their momentum when the cutscene started, I remembered laughing with a friend about what happened more than I remember being annoyed about the brief loss of progress. And I think that's what I'm always going to hold on to Frontiers for. I won't forget the frustrating aspects of the game, but I'll remember the sheer enjoyment I felt from far longer. It's that stupid Ratatouille meme of the food critic eating the meal and being warped back to being a kid again. I'm playing Frontiers, but remembering my first time playing through levels like Speed Highway in Adventure 1 or Green Forest in Adventure 2. A feeling I hadn't felt in such a long time playing a new Sonic game, where I didn't feel like I was just forcing myself to get to the end, but enjoying the trip all the way through. When the game launched, the game's composer Tomoya Ohtani came out and said something about the game's second ending theme, One Way Dream. It's a song that only plays if you beat the game on hard for the true ending, and listening to the lyrics, it's clear what they're trying to say. Ohtani said that the lyrics were a message to the fans of Sonic from Sonic Team itself, and when you look at the lyrics themselves and you hear it playing through the credits, you can feel the message more clearly. You and me, we're built on trust. That's why we can always get up. Even if they laugh, we'll never bite the dust. Heads up high, reach for the top. Give it everything you've got. Frontiers, while at times has a shaky foundation under its feet, is a heartfelt creation from Sonic Team to the fans. It's a game that you can feel the reverence and love for the franchise pouring into its world and gameplay. Since the game's launch, the director of the game, Morio Kishimoto, has been upfront and incredibly sociable with the fans. Often you can find him on Twitter talking and responding to people's enjoyments and criticisms with an open mind. And I think that's beautiful to see. To have him respond and acknowledge the way that people feel on both sides of the conversation. It shows that Kishimoto cares about this game, this franchise, and that he wants to improve upon it. Not even just in a sequel, but with the base game that we already know has the DLC and likely even more patches to help with the game's overall quality. And while it's not perfect, while there's still aspects that can be improved upon, that's true of everything. I'm willing to give Sonic Team the trust again, to create something even better. Trust to bring us new stories and adventures for these characters and to take us to even further horizons. At least until they pivot and make Shadow the Hedgehog 2. Wait, did we save Big? Where the hell did we get Big out of that portal? Where?